Hi, this is the Plus One podcast, and my name is Joe Houghton. Today I'm honoured to be speaking to Dee McGillicuddy, who was recently a recipient of UCD's highest Teaching Excellence Award. And her work has also been nominated, I believe, and she'll probably tell us about this in a little while, for a European award by UCD. And, you know, as I've asked my network, who should I talk to for the podcast? Dee's name kept coming up. And I know of Dee, and I've been on a few Zoom sessions with Dee through the Innovation Academy and stuff like that. But I've never really had a chance to sit down and talk to her. So I've really been looking forward to this hour. Dee's background is in Dees, which those of you who are not familiar with the Irish education system is, well, I'll let Dee explain it. She can explain it better than me probably, but it's more disadvantaged kind of areas, schools and students. Primary school teaching, I think, was where Dee started, but she's done the whole master's in education and PhD in education. I think you called yourself an accidental PhD. There's a story there. And your work seems to be focused around children, marginalized groups like the traveller community and stuff like that. And it took you, I see it took you 7 years to get the PhD. So that there's a story there as well. In her 2-word introduction, Dee describes herself as empathetic and inspiring. And certainly both of those words definitely hold true from the interactions we've had so far. So, I mean, welcome to the podcast, Dee. It's great to finally have a chance to have a chat with you.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Oh my God, I'm actually mortified. But thank you for that lovely introduction. It's strange to sit on this side of a conversation because usually I'm the person who asks the questions.
Yeah.
But I've been really looking forward to speaking with you too, Joe. I mean, we just had a quick chat there, and like, you are inspiring in the work that you do and the way you connect with people and bring people together. So I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to partake in this podcast alongside all your other fellow podcast invitees. So thank you very much for having me.
I mean, I'm like a kid in a sweet shop at the moment because, I mean, I'm just lining up all these interviews with these amazing educators and getting to talk to them. And it's a constant buzz for me at the moment. It's, I'm loving it. So, I mean, you know, you're a teacher. You started out in primary school, and I know on the questionnaire survey thing that I sent out, one of the things you put in there was that 2 of your primary influences for going into teaching were your primary school principal. Now that's a while ago, isn't it? And also
not that long ago. Well, not that old.
And your Jobstown principal as well. Yeah. So tell us about these 2 inspiring people and how they kind of influenced your life.
Yeah. So I grew up in I suppose a rural community, if you like, on the outskirts of Dublin, but it's still very rural. And I went to a typical rural school where there were 4 teachers, which would have been big in terms of rural schools. So I grew up and came through school with a class of 12. And within that, there was a huge diversity in terms of, you know, my classmates and their backgrounds. And I always had an interest in education and being a teacher. I think I've always wanted to be a teacher. And my little daughter actually at the moment is kind of showing similar kind of interests, which is lovely. But when I was in school, I used to be the person who went and helped the other children. Maybe I'd finish my work quite quickly. And, you know, I often got to sit down with my classmates and help them, or I'd go down to the infant class when I was in 3rd and 4th class to help the infants and the infant teacher. And I just used to love it, you know. So when I went to post-primary school, then I was shipped out of the community, which is an interesting experience, I think, to go to post-primary school because we didn't have a post-primary school nearby as a rural community. And so when I went into post-primary school, I used to go down and spend my summers in the primary school helping out.
Right.
Doing everything. So helping in the classrooms, doing the roll book for Mr Keegan, who was my former primary school principal, and actually met him recently enough, and it was just lovely to see him, because he's had a big impact. And actually all the teachers in St Martin's Primary School in British had a huge impact on my life and my journey, certainly to where I am now. And I think the thing about him was he nurtured that interest, he spotted it in me, and, he certainly encouraged it and was more than welcoming, along with the other teachers, to have me down in the summer helping out in the school. And it was really formative for me, and it really kind of cemented for me my love of education and really made me determined to become a primary school teacher. So that was my primary school principal. And then I went on an interesting journey into primary school teaching, because when I was doing my Leaving Cert, I was actually quite ill, so I ended up in hospital. So I didn't actually get the points to do PATS or any of those courses to become a primary school teacher. So I got arts, as we used to call it, in UCD. And I remember distinctly going to the UCD Open Day when I was in sixth year and saying, I won't be going to UCD, I'll be going to St. Pat's in Drumcondra to become a primary school teacher. But unfortunately, I didn't get the points. So I did end up in UCD. And I took the scenic route into primary school teaching. So I did an arts degree and I studied Irish, geography and German in UCD. And do you know what? It was the best journey. So, taking the scenic route for me was, again, really formative. And I made the best of friends. I met my husband.
Right.
And which, pros and cons there, Joe. He'd say the same. So then, having completed that, then I applied for the Hdip in primary education. It just opened up again in the Irish education system back in 1998. So I applied for that, and I got in then to do the Hdip in a place called Frebel College, which I hadn't heard of until I actually got the place and didn't really know what this Froebel was.
No.
But it turns out Froebel was a really inspirational philosopher in education, particularly early education. And again, had a great time there, a brilliant training experience. And from that, then I ended up going for my job in Jobstown in Tala, and in with Mr. Michael Murphy. And we all refer to Michael as, or we refer to our time as the Michael Murphy School of Education. He was just a really inspirational leader and a wonderful, wonderful principal and a wonderful, wonderful person.
And what made him an inspirational leader? What was it that,
Yeah.
Why? What? Because I love this, because when I teach leadership in my classes, I tell people, think about somebody that you found inspirational, and what was it about them?
Yeah, I think he was just very nurturing. He'd spot an opportunity and he'd spot a talent, and he'd give people then the freedom to go and try things.
Right.
He wasn't afraid to let people take a risk.
Right.
And I think that's very liberating it takes courage for him to do that. And then it's very liberating for the people then he allows to do that, and also he was a bit of crack and a bit of a laugh, and we all had a bit of fun. And I think, fun and leadership and fun in our working environments, I think we underestimate the power of that. And he was just fantastic. And then he encouraged me then to do my master's, and gave me opportunities and helped me along the way there as well. So he was just a wonderful, wonderful man and a wonderful leader. And I definitely think one of my mentors. And it's really funny, because when I would ever say that to Michael, he'd squirm. He doesn't like me saying that.
Right.
But he really, truly, without realizing it, he's had actually a profound impact on the education system, because many of the teachers who've worked in Jobstown have actually gone across the country and become leaders in different schools across the country. And that has really stemmed from him and his leadership in a school. Yeah.
Wow. What a lovely testament to him, and and Mr. Keegan as well. That's that's fantastic, isn't it?
Mm.
What else has inspired you on your educational journey? You know, those two people certainly did, but what else took you to this place of kind of spending your life on helping other people and inspiring other people?
The children in the classrooms, the communities that I've had the absolute honor and privilege of working in. I think they have inspired me. And I think when I got into teaching initially, I thought I'd go in and change the world, and I think any aspiring teacher that you meet, the majority want to make a difference in people's lives, and that's fundamentally why we go into teaching. And when you go into a system and you realize that actually some of the things that are happening within the system aren't actually helping at all to change children's lives, you become quite frustrated by it. And that has really inspired me on my journey, So I spent 10 years working in Jobstown in a wonderful school in St. Thomas's, and met beautiful, wonderful families and very challenging circumstances for some of those families. And then for other families, they're just so inspiring and inspirational in what they've done and for their children and for themselves, given very difficult circumstances in some instances. And that inspires me, and I carry that with me. I actually carry it as part of my responsibility in anything I do. So when I'm in the education system and even working now in academia, I kind of always come back to that and say, is what I'm doing helping me make their lives any different, And if it isn't, then I have to change something. And I think that's fundamentally how I try and think about what I'm doing. And it brings authenticity for me as an educator. And also, I have that all the time in my backpack, is this making a difference? And if it's not, then there's something I need to do to change that.
Yeah. And I mean, of itself, that's inspiring. I mean, you wrote last June for the Irish Times. I was reading earlier on, and you wrote, it's been well documented by organisations such as Children's Right Alliance that children are particularly vulnerable with our society, and they've been especially impacted by school closures, including those living in poverty, children who have additional needs, and those who require specialised support and care. So, I mean, it's funny because as an educator, primarily I'm teaching master's students at the Smurfit Business School, and most of them are coming from reasonably privileged backgrounds. They've got all the equipment that they need and all this kind of stuff. Now I know we have other Aspire scholars and people coming in who've been given a chance through other channels as well. But it's easy to forget, isn't it, that not everybody does have all the benefits and all the advantages. And I think perhaps some educators in some areas of education kind of don't necessarily see that and perhaps are not informed by that. And that's perhaps a pity.
Yeah. I think it's I think it's really important that, people see that. I think, the cracks in inequalities have always been in our education system. And I think maybe it was Michael D. Higgins or Mary Robinson who said, what the pandemic has done is forced us to hold a mirror up and actually look at those, cracks. Yeah. And they're not very far beneath the surface, and I think anybody who works in those areas or works with children or young people and families who are living in, really in communities that have a lot of poverty, know and see this on a daily basis. But I think it's not really within our national consciousness. And, I don't know why that is, because, there are children who have been impacted and young people who've been deeply impacted by the pandemic. And, unfortunately, I've heard of former students of mine who the pandemic has resulted in them, and other factors has resulted in them being lost. They've actually taken their lives. So we're talking about profound poverty that deeply impacts on our children, because these children turn into adults like ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, and, when you're working in those communities and you see it, it's very difficult to sit in a comfortable space with that. So just to give you an example, when I was working in sixth class, I was teaching sixth class one year, and I was doing a research project as well at the same time. So I was going to visit a sixth class in a more advantaged area in Dublin. And so I left my sixth class in Jobstown and took off over to this lovely school in South County Dublin, and went into the sixth class. And I couldn't get over the difference in the size of the children, their physical space that they were taking, because the children in Jobstown were so small compared to the children in the more advantaged school.
Wow.
And I was a physical representation for me of the impact of poverty on children. And there are children who have been struggling through the pandemic. I mean, children in the most advantaged families have been struggling, and the impact of that, I think, will be profound, and I think we need to do something about it as a society. And because otherwise what we will end up with, particularly in those communities that are socioeconomically disadvantaged, is, a generational lag behind in terms of how we get on with that, and how they get on. So there are serious implications, and I think we're not having those serious conversations to solve those. I have to say the Children's Rights Alliance and the Ombudsman have been very vocal, and it's great to hear them vocal and speaking up, particularly for children in more marginalised communities. But until there's a political agenda to do something about it, I don't know what will happen there, Yeah.
That's it's scary stuff, isn't it? But it's real, and it's
life and
real
death
people.
stuff, Joe. It's life and death. And I don't think people think about poverty, or they think about, they have this image in their mind, but it's actually life and death stuff, and unfortunately we're losing young people to death, so I definitely think, we need to bring it to our social consciousness a little bit more than we are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, a couple of my master's students are involved with a startup kind of mental health charity called Tribe at the moment. And I'll put the links in the show notes for that. And yeah, I mean, I've been involved in suicide prevention for years with Samaritans and Pieta House and stuff like that. And there is definitely still a huge need for mental health provision, but also just general provision for disadvantaged communities. You've done work with the traveller community, haven't you? Tell us a little bit about that. And
yeah, I suppose all through my career I've worked with traveller children. I've had the privilege of working with traveller children. They're just wonderful, and their families. And I've worked with them in school. I also did a study with Professor Dimna Devine in the School of Education, looking at traveller experiences of their lives. So we used a photo voice methodology to capture, how children were experiencing their lives and experiencing the things they liked about their lives, and then, the things that they found a little bit more challenging. And I suppose, again, what strikes me from that study in particular was, how marginalised and how surveilled and how watched and how controlled the traveller community are.
tell me, I mean, there's people outside Ireland who don't know what the traveller community is.
Mm.
I mean, I'll probably be awfully politically incorrect now, but I mean, coming from an English background, this would be like the gypsy community, would it? These are people who very often are moving around in either caravans or mobile homes, but sometimes have permanent fixtures as well. Is that true?
Yeah,
Is that the
so
right?
the traveller community are an ethnic minority, and they only actually recently received recognition as an ethnic group.
Okay.
And traditionally, they would have many would have had a nomadic kind of life, moving around the country, traveling around and being allowed to, do work in different communities. But what happened was there were policies then brought in the Irish government brought in policies then where they wanted to have travellers settle into communities and not allow them travel around anymore. And as a result of that, I think, the housing situation for travellers has been absolutely shocking. There are many traveller families who live in poverty, many who may be homeless. At the same time, the traveller community is not homogenous. There are also travellers who are settled within our communities. So it's a diverse group. It's not just a one.
Right.
Sometimes, we think of travellers as just one type, but
Yes.
actually it's, they're a very diverse group of people, and there are some amazing traveller activists and spokespeople. One person in particular who comes to mind is Dr. Hannah McGinley, who I have the absolute privilege of learning from. And again, somebody who's really important in the work that she's doing with the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment. And she's reviewing at the moment the curriculum and having a look at traveller representation within that. So, I think there's amazing traveller spokespeople who really highlight the issues at how marginalised a group the traveller community are. When I was working in Marino Institute of Education, I actually started working on a project where we were looking at how to bring travellers into primary school teaching, so to become a primary school teacher. And we were writing a pathway for that. So that project is being undertaken at the moment in Marino, and I think it's having great success, which is fantastic.
Fabulous, yeah.
Yeah.
And Jen Lynch, my first interviewee, works at Marino as well.
Oh yeah, I think she works in the college. This is the institute. There's two different.
They're different. Right. Okay.
Yeah, but they're very close to each other. And then, and then in UCD now, I'm hoping to get involved with a project which is looking at something similar at the moment as well. So, again, it's that marginalised voice, and it goes back to the children that I can think of in my head as I'm speaking to you, who again have had an impact and inspire me to do better for them, And I think about how marginalised they were in terms of how they were viewed in community, and how I'd like to help change that. But there's a mantra, and nothing about us without us. So I'm very conscious of never standing up and taking the voice of somebody who's from that community. I think really for me it's about trying to give space for that voice to come forward, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that's very powerful. Yeah, that's giving people a voice. That seems to be a common thread that I'm hearing as I get more into this education space, and listen to people who really know what they're talking about. I still feel like I'm just learning so much by talking to you and talking to, all these incredible educators. But that seems to be one thing that comes through. The sage on stage seems to be dead. Yeah. And this idea of student voice and student representation in a real way in this co-created learning space idea, which really to me was frighteningly new. Before I started looking at education, at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very tied to, well, from my perspective, working in education, with, I suppose, young people from age 18 and younger,
Yeah.
it's very much tied to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that whoever is engaging within a process has a voice, and it sounds very simple, let's just give people a voice, but actually we don't do enough of it in education across all of the sectors. But, talking from my own experience, or speaking from my own experience, that again is something that I'm quite passionate about, children's rights, and, ensuring that they have a voice, that they have a space to participate, and also that their views are taken on board. It's very easy just to listen and say yes, 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 without actually acting upon it. And Professor Laura Lundy, actually, for anyone who's listening and interested in that, does fantastic work around the importance of rights, voice, participation, and has written recently about tokenism. Oftentimes we dismiss something as being tokenistic, but actually maybe there's a power to tokenism. Maybe it's a move in the right direction as opposed to being dismissive of it. But certainly I think it's important that creating that space for voice becomes a key part of what we do in education. And I think we actually need a lot more of it at third level, or higher education. I think we need a lot more of student voice being enabled, listened to and acted upon.
Yeah. I remember, years ago, when I was in big business and running international, multinational teams and stuff, there was that phrase, kind of voice of the customer, VOC, and we always used to try and apply that to projects and stuff like that. So it's the same thing, isn't it? Voice of the customer.
And Joe, that's really interesting, because, this commodification of education concerns me. And I do hear, I have heard of students being referred to as clients or customers, and I think that's what's that signaling for me is the marketization of education, or the neoliberal kind of underpinnings of what we're doing.
Right.
And I think the pandemic has absolutely exposed that, this idea that education is there to serve, that we're there to provide a service, and, it's that consumerist kind of interaction between, the teacher and the student. And that concerns me, because that's not what education should be. Education is more than an exchange, or let's talk about third level. It's more than accessing content on Brightspace and then writing an essay about the content on Brightspace. It's about the interactions, the human connections, the deeply relational pedagogic interaction between the teacher and the student. And whether that is the sage on the stage, or whether it's a more active, dynamic learning environment, students are learning all the time through those interactions. And if we sway towards that more consumerist language and talk about clients and customers, which we are and is happening, that is the wrong way to look at what we're doing in education. For me, education is the foundation upon which we build our society. It's the cornerstone of what we're doing. And if we don't have a strong education system with strong values to underpin what we're doing, then we don't understand who we are as a society, and we don't understand who we are as human beings within the broader world, as global citizens. And, I think we need to be really careful and I think the pandemic has exposed for me the need to have a conversation at societal level around the importance of education and what role it plays within our society, what value we place on it, and what we need to do to protect it, and not drive it towards that consumerist, client, customer-based approach that I often hear spoken about. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Shane Bergen, has actually called for, along with other colleagues, a citizens' assembly on education. And I think the government have committed to doing that, but I certainly hope they follow through because it's urgently required. Yeah.
Wow. I love that you challenged me there, if you like, with that statement, because I mean, if I think about the kind of student cohorts that come, into my class, for instance, and they come to do a master's in project management, I suspect that most of them are coming to Smurfit as a customer, and they're coming to get a master's from Smurfit, which they see as a door opening tool to, I don't know, a graduate role with Ernst & Young or whatever. Yeah. So how do we move them from that mindset of I'm paying 12 grand to come to Smurfit for a year or 2 years to get a master's degree, and that's a transactional customer delivery model, isn't it? To the deeper learning model. Is this where Flourish comes in? Is this where your safe space and the stuff comes in, or is it something different?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh yeah.
Because this is where you got this is one of the key things that got you your Teaching Excellence Award and has nominated you up into the European Teaching Awards and stuff like that, isn't it? But I think it's really important, this, because I think a lot of educators would feel somewhat challenged by what you just said, but also resonate with it. And I'm thinking, I agree with you. That absolutely learning and creativity and all that stuff is the fundamental raison d'etre for education, but it's not really the reality when you get into the classroom at Smurfit. The reality is they feel like they're customers. And how do I change that? How do I, as an educator at the coalface with students in front of me each week, how do I change their perception and perhaps my perception of that in a practical manner?
Yeah, really interesting question. I think what I do is the students I work with are PME students, so professional masters in education students. So they're coming in training to become post-primary school teachers.
Okay.
And I usually have them maybe week 1 or 2 of when they've actually come into the program in UCD, and I'd be maybe one of their first lectures. And the very first lecture, I actually challenge them to think about what education is and what it's for. And then, my second lecture is questioning, why do we have curriculum and whose curriculum is it anyway? My third lecture is, why are we doing what we're doing when we have so many social inequalities within our system? Why are we doing that in schools? So I think for educators, it's about questioning and just putting those questions to our students, and I think you can do that no matter what your subject is. If you're preparing students for medicine, I know again would be my sister works in the School of Medicine, and again there would be that kind of transactional thing around I need to become a doctor, so I need to pass this exam, so you need to help me, whatever you need to do to get me through this exam, but maybe we need to go why do we feel like this, and what's your role as a doctor within society, and how's that profession viewed? And when you meet a patient, what kind of an interaction is that you're having? Is it a care and empathetic kind of an interaction, or is it a purely transactional interaction? Because ultimately, whatever you teach, fundamentally, it's down to human relationships. And I think whatever we're doing in our teaching in the university, we're teaching the fundamentals of relationships as human beings, And I think going to my Flourish initiative, that for me was about providing space for the students in the lecture theatre when we were actually face to face, just to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just to be human and connect as human beings, and for it not to be coming in and engaging in that transaction. between content and listening and passive engagement. It was about, you know, how do we bring people into the room, you know, because oftentimes when you're traveling, and we were just talking about traveling between Zoom calls now, but when you're traveling from lecture to lecture, you're just physically bringing yourself to a space. But have you actually brought yourself in all different dimensions of who you are into that space? So Flourish for me was giving that space to students at the beginning of the lecture, just actually to connect with themselves. Now, some of them were looking at me going, who is your one at the top of the lecture theatre asking us to do this? At one stage, one lecture, I had them all down. I had 100 and whatever students, and I brought them all down to the front of the lecture theatre, you know, and I just said, you know, would you have a go at this and see what happens? I'd say now, they were looking at me going, who is this? What is she doing, you know? But it was actually about bringing them present into the room and then allowing them the space to connect with themselves. Because I really don't think, and this is from the Innovation Academy, what I've learned is you can't connect with others until you connect with yourself, you know, and as human beings, you need to be able to connect with others, and you need to put yourself first in that kind of interaction.
So rewind a little bit then. So where did the idea for Flourish come from, and what was its gestation, and how did you develop it and trial it and put it into practice? Tell us the story.
Okay. And just to say, it's still kind of early stages with it, right. But I have a plan for my innovation fellowship about what I'd like to do with it. So it started really from my own journey in the Innovation Academy and meeting the wonderful people who brought us on that journey.
Yes. And I think you were on the course probably the year before me, I think.
Yeah, I think I was just, and we were face to face at that stage, and I just found the whole experience very rejuvenating, you know. And what I valued from my experience was that time and space to think about how we can come together as community, and then how we can build a values-based approach to working as community, and, you know, through that tap into our creativity. And then, you know, for me, then it's about then going out and leading that in education.
Yes.
So they're kind of the fundamental pillars for me within the Flourish initiative. So I started, first of all, running monthly Flourish sessions, for the want of a better word, with my colleagues. And I was so surprised at how many people turned up and engaged, and it was wonderful. Like, it was lovely. It was just a lovely way to connect.
And when you say your colleagues, what other teachers, other
no, this was in my school, in
your school?
In UCD, yeah. So right. I invited my colleagues to participate in my Flourish initiative. And the first day I kind of stood in the room going, oh my God, nobody's going to turn up. This is going to be a disaster. Yeah. And fair play.
Anybody come to my party?
Yeah, exactly. It was like my birthday party again. God. But fair play, like, people took a risk and they came, and we just did different things, you know, tapping into ourselves, tapping into our well-being. And one of the most impactful one was just going for a walk around the lake, the new lake down at the new lake down beside the engineering building. And I think the reason that was so impactful was because people actually took time out just to go and walk around the lake, you know, and just engage in an exercise where they just actually sat with themselves and walked and, you know, thought about the different things that were going through their heads and kind of mindfully engaged in that process. So, like, that was one of the most impactful activities for people. And that says a lot actually about how intensified our working lives in education have become over the past years, you know, that going for a little mindful walk has such an impact on people, and evoking an emotional reaction. So that speaks to me a lot.
Does that get me away from the laptop and the Zoom camera?
Yeah, exactly though, Joe. And, like, again, a concern of mine will be, you know, this increase in productivity that we've had in terms of, you know, it's working out great for all the institutions and the businesses, isn't it? Because they've people in front of laptops now for a solid 9 hours, were you saying, Joe? 10 hours some evenings.
Yeah.
Working. Like they're getting their money's worth. So what happens now? What has happened to the spaces in between? And those spaces in between are so important. They're so important as educators, because it's only when we have those in between spaces that we can actually stop and think about what it is we want to do and be creative in that. And I learned that from the Innovation Academy. So then with my Flourish initiative, I decided to trial it with the students. And like that, at the beginning of every lecture, I just made a space. We took a different theme every week, and we just explored that as part of some of the activities I did. And then I went into my lecture and we did our lecture. But everyone was more open to the lecture then. Now they probably switched off after 5 minutes, but it kind of, and the feedback from the students was incredible. So this year, because we moved online, I actually put some work into putting an online resource up there for students. So I in a module I was co-teaching with my fantastic colleague, Rachel Farrell. I put up 10 weeks of Flourish activities for students to use, and they could opt in. Yeah, they could opt in. It was there for them. So, as an educator, and as this year anyway, you don't know if people are engaging at all, right? No, you can look at your Brightspace statistics, but you're not too sure if people are engaging. So anyway, I put up 10 weeks of different activities, mindfulness, self-care, different things that the students could use just to give them a 5-minute to themselves, a space for themselves. Because if I'm feeling it, my God, these students who are on the front line teaching in post-primary schools are 100% feeling it a lot more than I am. So just wanted
and just to make this clear, so this is for teachers. So you calling them students, but they're student
teachers, if you like.
So if you like, people who are listening to this podcast are probably educators, a lot of them. So is this stuff that they could take and apply and use?
Absolutely.
Are you going to make this available online? As have you got a Flourish website, or are you running a series of workshops, or because I want to come?
Wow, thanks, Joe. No, I have nothing. I've nothing done about that. No.
Well, maybe that's something we should talk about.
Maybe it is.
I could help you. Certainly help you get online with this. So definitely.
Thanks, Joe. But I put all the stuff up, and there were 10 weeks of different activities there, self-care and all the rest. And I wasn't sure had students engaged with it. But actually, Rachel, who I mentioned, told me that at one of the meetings that they'd had with the students, that the students actually were asking for more of it in the second trimester, because I wasn't working with them, and I just thought, wow, okay, someone engaged with it, and it's helping. So even if it helps, and I think this is really important as an educator, even if it helps 1 or 2 people, that's making an impact. I think sometimes we think we need to hit everyone, everyone has to be on board and everyone has to be enjoying it. But actually it's about the 1 or the 2, because oftentimes those 1 or 2 people are the people who need it most. They're looking for it, and you've put it there for them, and they seek it and then they use it, But for me, the power of this is the ripple effect. So I have now had student teachers who are on the PME who've come back to me to tell me that they're now using this approach in their classrooms with their students. So it's a ripple into the education system, Yeah. And it's funny, it's just a tiny pebble you're dropping in, and that ripple out of that, I think, can be profound. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and actually another student told me she was doing it with her students and actually with her family. So
oh my goodness,
you just don't know, if what you're doing is going to, and you'd hope it's a positive impact, but how it's going to actually ripple down into people's lives.
I mean, this idea of +1, which I picked up from the UDL digital badge, just make one change.
Yeah.
But as an educator, to make change in your teaching space is scary.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Well, I don't know whether it is for you, but it always is for me. I mean, I don't know whether that's imposter syndrome coming out or whatever, but I'm very often feeling quite challenged about making a change, because I'm in this space that I kind of know. And it's a kind of relatively safe space because I kind of know the way it'll go. And if I introduce change, or if I introduce something that I don't know how it's going to go, that can, what will the students say? And what if what if I crash and burn and all that? But you've actually kind of embraced that by the sound of it. And
it's a scary space. I mean, I remember standing at the front of one of the big lecture theatres in science with our gorgeous bunch of students, and I was standing there, and I was just about to kind of launch into the first exercise, and I was thinking, oh my God, I'm standing in front of 100 people here, and I'm going to ask them to do something different, you know? And I love Brené Brown.
yeah,
I'm a Brené Brown sucker.
yeah,
And the idea of taking risk and being vulnerable, you know? And I think if you acknowledge and tell people listen, and I openly said that to the students, said, listen, I'm going to take a risk here. It might fall flat on its face. I say all this. I'm very open. It's probably my problem. But, you know, it might fall flat on my face, and please give me feedback after. But would you give it a go and see what you think? You know, and I had to say that to them the day I brought them down to the front of the lecture theatre. You know, they were all going, what the? You know, and I think if you're open about your vulnerability and and you don't fear it, and actually sometimes if you just say it out and say, listen, I'm going to take a risk here. Let's see what happens. And you say that out and you say it to the students, and they become part of that journey and part of taking that risk. I think it's not as scary, you know. And then if it fails, it fails, you know. I had no idea Flourish would kind of grow the legs that it has, you know. I really, honestly, Joe, I didn't really see my own value in what I was doing with it, you know. And it isn't until other people say to you that you go, oh my gosh, or you get the feedback from the students, or, you know, you get the lovely comments, and that you kind of go, okay, you know.
There is,
it does have value. Yeah.
And I mean, so have you exposed Flourish outside your own classroom yet to, you know, so if there's somebody listening today who wants to find out more or wants to try it, how do they find out about Flourish? Or is that part of your fellowship? Is that maybe part of what you're going to do with the summer is bring this out into a public space?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it. I actually presented the concept at Failta. So for any teachers who might be listening and interested, there is a video of me somewhere really badly.
Well, maybe send me the link and I'll put it up in the show notes, because I'll
send you the link. I'm sure it's still up there. But I did present the concept, so it's there for anybody who'd like to have a look at it. But in terms of the fellowship, what I would like to do now is look at more formally embedding this approach in our programs. So making a formal space within the really intensified programs that we have around initial teacher education, specifically to tap into personal growth, personal well-being, and creativity. And the value in that is just incredible. And interestingly, the Teaching Council are now releasing new guidelines on initial teacher education and the different component parts that we'd like to embed within it. And creativity is one of those strands, and, you know, well-being is hugely topical within the education system. And if we don't mind our teachers' well-being, how can we expect to mind our students' well-being? So what I want to do is develop a space and a module that is purely focused on, you know, minding well-being, how to do that, but also how to tap into your creativity and use creative pedagogy as a way of exploring learning in a safe way in a classroom. So it's sort of integrating both. So that's where Flourish is moving for me at the moment. But I hadn't actually thought anymore about externally doing anything with it. But certainly, if anyone was interested in hearing more, please do get in touch.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny because, I mean, my kind of closing question was kind of, you know, your plus one was creating space to be and think, but that's what you've talked about for the last like 15, 20 minutes, which is brilliant. So yeah, I mean, can people get hold of you, email or Twitter or whatever?
Absolutely, yeah. I love hearing from people. So please do get in touch. You can contact me. I'm on Twitter. The odd time I fall off the face of Twitter and take a break from it. But yeah, I'm on Twitter and quite. I'd be on Twitter probably too much. My husband would say. At Dee McGillicuddy, and then you can contact me on my email address as well.
Right, and we'll put those in the show notes. So that,
brilliant.
Yeah. Well, that was a couple of minutes ago. That was the alarm going off, telling us we'd been for an hour. So I can't believe.
Oh my God, Joe!
So I better not take out to kind of the whole of your day, because I feel like we could just carry on for the rest of the morning. This is wonderful. But I think the Flourish idea is very powerful in its apparent simplicity, but the challenge for a lot of us as educators is to make that change, isn't it? Is to actually, like you say, be brave enough to be vulnerable, and try something new with the students that will help them engage in the space better. I love it. I want to hear more about this. I mean, if I can help in any way as you move forward with Flourish, I'd love to be involved with that. That's it sounds so powerful. And I want to hear more to see how I might implement that in my classrooms as well.
Thanks, Joe.
That's
you.
Fantastic.
And thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I'm deeply honoured and privileged.
No. I mean, it's been a super hour, and I think people are going to love what you've been sharing with them. So thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you.